Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode in our Aussie Aliens and Unidentified Aerial Phenomena series. In this episode, we take a look at the encounter that Kelly Cahill had when extraterrestrials became more than fiction and almost deadly in their encounter. As humans, we want to feel accepted socially, which is probably why not so many people who have had an encounter or anything supernatural occur actually come forward about it. I know I haven't publicly come forward about my experience because I don't know how people will react, especially family and friends. But I hope to, as more and more people are being open about their supernatural and extraterrestrial experiences. But in this particular event, early August of 1993, a 27-year-old mother who goes by the name of Kelly Cahill, wanting her true identity to be withheld for obvious reasons. Nobody wants the media circus, as we've seen from the Knowles experience back in 1988. Kelly's encounter was 5 years after the Knowles family encounter. She had heard about the Knowles case back then and felt very sorry for them and what had been done to them in the media. It all started when Kelly and her husband Andrew took a trip to a friend's place in Monbulk.
My husband and I were driving up to my girlfriend's place in Monbulk, which is in the Dandenong Mountains. We were driving on Belgrave-Hallam Road, and it was just on dusk.
On August 8th, 1993. It was Kelly who noticed what could only be described as a UFO or U.A.P. in a clearing close to Belgrave South. Kelly saw for only a few seconds what looked to be a UFO, a large object with lights around it, before disappearing behind trees as they drove past the location. She mentioned it to her husband Andrew, who, being of Muslim belief, did not believe in such things and thought it was quite dangerous to do so. After spending the rest of the afternoon and evening with friends, Kelly says they left close to midnight to start their journey back home. This trip should have taken them about an hour and a half, which is what it took them in the morning. They didn't get more than a kilometre away before in front of them, twice the height of the trees, was an object with lights. Kelly described the object as being like a blimp or like a zephyr, described in previous encounters we've mentioned. Kelly saw the silhouette of people, saying to Andrew, "It looks like people are in there." But as soon as she said it, it shot off to the left and out of sight. Shocked at what they'd seen, they didn't get more than another 1.8 kilometres when the light came back, but much brighter than before, ahead of them.
I came across what I thought was a screen or a wall of light across the road.
It was like a sun shining in front of them, so bright that they had to shield their eyes to be able to see it through the windshield. They were really seeing something. Then all of a sudden, it all disappears. They're rolling in the car, the station wagon they'd been travelling in, along the road in darkness and quiet. No longer excited and scared, but tired, exhausted and drained. Confused, they continued down the road, trying to understand what had just happened. Kelly talked quite a bit about it, but Andrew did not want to talk about it at all. Kelly said it was like she had blacked out, and Andrew got agitated. He came to a lot quicker than Kelly did, and drove home. They seemed to argue over the events and the time frame, Kelly believing that the drive took them 2.5 hours to get home, but Andrew stated that he was driving and knows that they left after 12, and it only took the usual 1.5 hours. Wanting to stop it all and forget about the whole thing, his beliefs worried him, and it worried that talking about it more could make it worse. Upon their return home, Kelly went to the bathroom, but noticed that she was bleeding. But it wasn't that time of the month, and the colour of it was very bright, not normal. It worried her. Not just that, but it kept coming so much that it soaked her jeans. When she changed out of them, she noticed there was also a triangle shape below her belly button, like burned into her skin, or that the skin was shaved a couple of layers down. She was curious about it at first, but being a busy mum had forgotten about it shortly afterwards. Although the bleeding continued, and just within a few weeks, Kelly is in hospital with an infection in her womb. This is commonly seen after a woman has a miscarriage. However, the doctors tested her and she wasn't pregnant. She has severe migraines and was losing a lot of weight, as well as a sensitivity to light and noise. But the doctors could not say what was wrong with her. They gave her some medication or antibiotics for the infection and let her go home only after one night of staying there. Things did not settle down in their home after. Electronic appliances began to short fuse and lights would turn on and off inside the home. The TV would turn on and off by itself, and she would get electric shocks from things that shouldn't conduct electricity, like wood and soil. This went on for about 9 to 10 months. But most frightening of all, just a few nights after being back from the hospital, Kelly, asleep in her bed, had a strange dream. She dreamt that she was in bed and could feel someone in the room near her, a presence, but she could not see anything. Andrew was in the lounge room. She heard a voice saying, "Not to be afraid," then felt like the life was being sucked out of her chest. As it was getting more intense, she suddenly woke up from her dream, but noticed a being next to her, standing by the bed, within arm's reach. It was a black figure. Kelly describes it as being tall and wearing a cloak, with a dark, long face, a pronounced slope to its cheekbones, and dull, bright red eyes. The cloak covered from below its chin down to the floor out of sight. Its body was hidden. Kelly was terrified and could not move. She could not look away from the creature, and it had its eyes fixed on her own. It stayed for some time. Kelly felt like it wanted her to know that it was real, that it was more than just simply a dream. And then it disappeared. Kelly was terrified. After a while she could move, and she got up and ran out to Andrew, who was asleep by the fire. She shook him awake and explained what had happened. Andrew tried to calm her down and talk it away as being maybe just a dream or that she was still half asleep. Kelly slept with the light on for the next 2 years, but there were to be more visits over the next 5 months. A few weeks after this first visitation, Kelly and Andrew went to visit other friends, and whilst they were there, the topic of UFOs came up. A strange thing happened. Andrew mentioned to the friends what had happened to them. He'd obviously started to believe that what they saw must have been real, and when he asked Kelly to tell them what she'd seen and what had happened to her, Kelly was quite confused, having no recollection of what had happened or what Andrew was talking about. Andrew, quite shocked after everything, that Kelly, who had argued the point with him before, now stated she didn't know anything about it. He was a little embarrassed, and they all moved on to another topic. Kelly was bothered by it, though. She knew Andrew wouldn't make up something so wild. He really believed something had happened. A few days later, the memory of what had happened came back to her in bits. It had come back to her and she'd try and discuss it with Andrew, but he no longer wanted to talk about it, probably still a little burnt that she didn't know anything about it when he went to tell her friends the other day. By the 1st of October, almost 2 months after the event, they travelled back to their original friend in Monbulk. During the trip, when they got to the same spot where the encounter had taken place, Kelly received a flash of what had happened that night. It all started to come back to her. She got a sickening kind of feeling all over. Her head was spinning and she broke into a cold sweat. She didn't discuss it with Andrew, but started to get more of a picture of what happened that night. After she reached her friend's house, she declined to go out with her friend, but instead stayed in, trying to work out what her thoughts all meant, trying to piece together flashes of what she was getting. From Kelly's memory, that night they had stopped the car after seeing the bright light. They'd actually driven into it. The road had bent, but they kept going forward and came to a stop. Kelly asked her husband Andrew to get out of the car and go and look at it. She remembered grabbing her handbag out of the car to take with her, as she never left it anywhere. Once out of the car, they walked across the road and to the fence line of the field, where they saw a UFO or craft at ground level in a gully. Kelly says she looked up the road and saw another car illuminated that had pulled up, a light blue car approximately 300 metres from where they were. There was people getting out of that car too. She described the object as being larger than that flew in front of them a few moments earlier, where they'd seen people inside. Kelly says that they were watching the UFO. At first, everything was calm. They saw what looked to be a black figure, a tall 7 foot or 2 metre being, come down to the ground or appear at the ground, much like what had been in her bedroom, followed by another 8 more. A wave of anxiety and worry and fear came over Kelly, not being able to stop herself from screaming out. She remembers yelling to her husband, "They've got no souls! They've got no souls!" As soon as she did this, the eyes lit up on these beings, bright red, and they started coming towards them across the field. The eyes, she says, were like red traffic lights. A little ways across the field they split, and some of the beings went towards the people that were in the blue car. Kelly noticed this. The next thing Kelly knew, she felt a power against her stomach and was thrown back. Everything went black. Kelly is winded as she hits the ground. She's writhing in pain. It's excruciating, agonising pain. She thinks that if she doesn't get up, she will die there on the ground. So it takes all of her effort to sit up. And when she sits up, she vomits. What on earth has just happened? Everything was black and she couldn't see. She was trying to stay conscious as she heard Andrew saying, "Let go of me," in a scared voice she'd never heard from him before. He wasn't afraid of anything. A male voice then said, "We don't mean you any harm." Then Andrew said, "Why did you hit Kelly then?" That was the last thing she heard, apart from her own voice. "Oh God, I'm going to be sick." She then must have blacked out again. When Kelly regained consciousness once again, she was still sitting up. The being with the red eyes was with her. She heard his voice, in real, not telepathically, but with her ears, as she had done when the being had talked to Andrew earlier. The being said, "We are a peaceful people." Kelly screamed back at the being, "If you are so peaceful, why are you doing this? Liar!" She heard the being calmly and with authority say, "Will someone please do something about her?" Kelly said his voice was direct and condescending. Seconds later, she felt another presence beside her. She yelled, "How dare you put terror into the hearts of these innocent people? Go back to where you came from." She then found herself back in the car with Andrew, dazed and confused. That was all she could remember at that point. How strange about what she's saying. They have no souls? How would she know? And how dare they put fear or terror into the hearts of these innocent people? It seems really strange what she's saying. What does she know? And which people? Is she talking about herself? Her husband? The people from the blue car? Who did she mean? What did she mean? Perhaps subconsciously she knew more about these beings than she realised. Soon it was time that Andrew picked her up and they were travelling home. She wanted to discuss more about it with Andrew, but he was reluctant. His reaction to some of what she was saying made her feel crazy, so she decided if she couldn't talk to Andrew, she would speak to someone in authority. She made a number of calls before someone put her on to Bill Chalker in Sydney. Bill Chalker we have mentioned before in our episodes. He's very knowledgeable about this sort of thing. However, as he was in Sydney and Kelly was in Melbourne, he thought it was best to link her up with John Orcatel in Melbourne, part of PRA, Phenomena Research Australia, who Kelly rang right away. John was quite enthusiastic and assured her she was not alone. Many other people had witnessed such events and had encounters. Within the week, they met up for lunch in Dandenong Hills, not far from where it all happened. John listened to Kelly, as well as had her fill out a questionnaire and sketch the craft and the beings. Kelly had not known much on this topic. She'd only briefly heard the Knowles story. John believed this made her more credible and her recollections uninfluenced. He also had Kelly keep a journal to write anything and everything she could about the encounter, as she remembered it. Kelly would later write a book based off this journal about the encounters, called Encounter. John was curious about the people she mentioned in the blue car. He placed an advertisement in the newspaper, simply for anyone who saw anything unusual on that night and the time frame in the sky, but nothing too descriptive. Surprisingly, he received a few calls, mostly that people had seen lights in the sky. But on November 17th, 3 rather professional people in their 30s made contact with John. The occupants of the blue car were Bill, a bank account manager, his wife Jane, and their friend Glenda, who was a registered nurse. What they said almost matched completely with what Kelly had said. They too had stopped and seen the UFO in the field and the beings, but that all was calm. They also stated that the 2 women were transported to the craft and remember laying down inside on their backs with faces looking down at them. Obviously extraterrestrial faces. They could talk to each other telepathically, but they don't remember seeing Kelly, Andrew, or their car. They did, however, remember seeing a man in a car. His headlights got their attention at the time. He too stopped and was looking at the object in the field. That must have been how Kelly had seen the blue car in darkness. The lights from the man driving in this car behind, which she possibly couldn't see, illuminated the car. The moon on that night was 69% visible, so it wasn't a new moon, it wasn't completely dark. The lone driver would not come forward for another 3 years. Apparently he'd told his wife about the situation and she urged him to make contact with authorities. After ringing a few different places and having people ridicule him or simply hang up, he gave up. Unfortunately, he wasn't as fortunate as Kelly had been in getting hold of Bill Chalker, nor had he seen the ad that John had put in the paper. John had the other 3 witnesses from the blue car write down and sketch their memories of what they had happened to them that night. The sketches matched Kelly's almost perfectly. John was relieved. He contacted Kelly to advise her on the similarities and asked her about a triangle mark or other marks that she may have had on her body. Kelly had not written about that in her recollections. She'd forgotten about that triangular mark burned below her belly button. She told John she didn't have any triangular marks or any other marks, something she would later recall. However, the other 2 women from the blue car had triangular marks and other marks, 3 dots on an inside of a thigh, and one of them had a mark on the ankle similar to having a cuff around it. Bill seems to have been kept out of it, much like Andrew, and it was because Bill, being a bank manager, didn't really want his name to be associated with such things. But it is noted that he also had hair fall out afterwards, which may have something to do with what was found on the site later on. John did not mention Kelly or Andrew to the members of the blue car, despite Kelly urging him to. She felt good knowing there was others who had seen it and figured they would too if they knew about her. But John wasn't ready yet. He had other things to do. John contacted the Monash University of Melbourne to perform tests and collect data on the field where the UFO had been. This took almost 18 months to complete, and surveys, infrared photography and magnetic readings. They did a whole bunch of stuff enthusiastically. Samples of the ground were taken from different areas of the field and sent off to different analysts for investigations. Their findings were quite curious.
We found lots of unusual anomalies and also magnetic problems, and also lots of changes in the soil chemistry.
A crescent-shaped indentation on the ground, precisely where the women said the UFO had been, and in this spot was higher than average sulfur content and a rare carbon compound called pyrene. Lots of unusual anomalies, magnetic problems, and many changes in the soil chemistry, John mentioned.
Also, there was a triangle formation on the ground of dead grass, which is spaced out in the circle itself. So it gave us a lot of good leads that there's something had been on the ground, because the physical effects was now starting to destroy the grass in the area.
Yet another interesting thing were the indentations within the semicircle, as if something had been pressed down underneath the craft.
Inside that semicircle was actually a triangular formation of 3 points spaced 6 metres apart, which correspond with the tripod that was drawn underneath the girl's craft.
John told Kelly another strange abnormality was that there were traces of tannic acid found that usually would have been washed away with the first rain, but these were coated in an unknown substance and preserved. The lone driver eventually told his story under the condition that he was to remain anonymous. He told of how he too had marks similar to the ladies from the car. He had 3 dots on the inside of his thigh and also received bruising to one of his ankles, much like a cuff mark. He too must have been examined as the 2 women were. It is at this point that perhaps John wanted to go public with this information, or possibly publish a book with names. The members of the blue car did not want their names or real names to be published and eventually took John to court over it. Things soured, and no one but Kelly would talk about what had happened anymore. And eventually, she wouldn't either. John, unable to release any information to anyone about the case, probably due to the court case, no further investigations were able to be taken further. We know Kelly published a book, Encounter, that has most of the information in it, including diagrams of where it happened and the sketches by all three women, as well as her recollections taken from her journal. She did many interviews at the time and a couple of conferences with Bill Chappell and others. Kelly has had time, a lot of time, to think about the events that happened that night and afterwards. She's been asked, had anything happened before? And she did say that her husband Andrew mentioned he may have had abductions as a child. She didn't think anything had happened to her previously, but then remembered back to a time 2 years before the event took place. She was almost full-term pregnant with her last child. She woke up laying on her stomach with her arms stretched out. Her water had broken and she'd lost time. She didn't remember going to bed. She didn't remember putting her nightdress on, which she noticed was inside out. She didn't think too long about it as she was now in labour, but the thought crossed her mind after the event that, having lost time, not remembering going to bed, and also waking up with a nightdress inside out, she thinks that she may have been abducted prior to the event. We know that UFOs were in the Melbourne vicinity in 1966 with the Westall UFO, probably around the time that the Cahills were born, or children. It's not known if Bill, Jane and Glenda, or the third man, have had previous encounters that they've remembered since the event, as they all refused to speak about the matter further. In most cases, people are visited throughout their lives, and sometimes even their children are visited. And what could the marks mean? It is quite easy to speculate, but I do wonder what happened to them all. We hear of many stories coming out of the US. It seems people over there are freer with the information, or possibly less ridiculed than people here in Australia. Stories about people being impregnated or having samples taken from men in order to create hybrid children. It seems quite curious and coincidental that they had marks below their belly buttons. We may not have heard the last from these witnesses. Like the Knowles, it is very understandable that they would want to remain anonymous. And how many more people have been abducted and don't remember? And the answer I'm really after is, what were the aliens doing on the field in the beginning for the people to happen upon them? What was going on near Belgrave South? Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We have many more to come. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and hit that notification bell so you're aware when we're putting up more tales of Aussie aliens and unidentified aerial phenomenon, including one where a man has an encounter in his own home, a rather intimate encounter, and had proof of it. Oh, stay tuned. Well, it's going to be a good one.
started racing and the adrenaline was sort of pumping through my body, and I'm thinking, we've just seen us back down there, we're in for, a close encounter.